The clock on the boardroom wall was one of ours, an original Vance and Son, the chairman. My father had designed it himself. Its case was carved from a single piece of reclaimed mahogany, its face a disc of polished obsidian. It didn't tick. It swept a single, silent, merciless rotation. A quiet testament to the perfection he demanded in every gear, every spring, every single movement. Now its silence felt like a judgment. I kept my hands folded on the cool, polished surface of the table. My posture was perfect, my breathing measured. Inhale for 4 seconds, hold for 7, exhale for 8. A technique for soldiers in combat, or for a woman watching her life being dismantled piece by piece. My brother Daniel couldn't. Look at me. He kept his gaze fixed on a point just over my left shoulder, his jaw working. He wore a suit that was too expensive for him, a desperate armor against his own weakness. Beside him, his wife Genevieve rested her hand on his forearm. A delicate touch, a possessive brand. Her expression was one of perfectly sculpted sympathy. It was an artist's rendering of concern, beautiful and entirely without soul. She was the artist. Daniel was just the clay. Lyra, Mr. Abernathy started, his voice a gravelly apology. He was the oldest one here, a man who had served on my father's board for 30 years. This is difficult. For all of us. I didn't grant him the mercy of a response. I just watched. To speak would be to feel. To feel would be to break. And my father had never tolerated broken things. He fixed them. Or he discarded them. The numbers don't lie. Daniel finally mumbled, the words costing him more than the suit. We're bleeding capital. The market has shifted. We need a more aggressive approach to new acquisitions and a leaner operational model he was reciting. These were not his words, they were hers. Genevieve's, I could hear their cadence in his stilted delivery. She'd coached him last night. I imagined them in the study of our family home, the one I was no longer welcome in, a glass of brandy in his hand and her whispers in his ear. She's too sentimental, darling. She's clinging to the past. Its company needs to look to the future. My sentimentality. He meant my refusal to fire the master watchmakers who had been with father for decades. Men with hands so steady they could place a screw the size of a dust mote without a tremor. He meant my insistence on using ethically sourced gold, which was more expensive. He meant my loyalty to the legacy he was so eager to sell for parts. The board has reviewed the Q3 projections. Abernathy continued, picking up the slack from my brother's cowardice. And we have also reviewed the proposal put forth by Daniel as majority shareholder. Majority shareholder, the words were acid. When father died, he split his shares. 45% to me, the one he'd trained since I could walk. 45% to Daniel, his firstborn son, and 10% to a trust, to be allocated to whichever of us proved more capable of carrying the Vance and Son name forward after 5 years. Daniel had married Genevieve in year 2. She was a master of a different kind of precision engineering. Social engineering. She had charmed, cajoled, and manipulated every member of that trust. 2 weeks ago, they had voted. And Daniel's 45% became 55%. Now, here we were. The motion, Daniel said, his voice gaining a sliver of false confidence, is to remove Lyra Vance from her position as Chief Executive Officer, effective immediately, and to install myself as acting CEO until a permanent replacement can be found. He finally met my eyes. For a second, I saw not the weak man he had become, but the boy I grew up with. The one who fell off his bike and cried until I put the chain back on for him. The one I defended in the schoolyard. That boy was gone? A hollowed-out thing sat in his place, all in favor, Abernathy asked, his voice low. Genevieve's perfectly manicured hand, the one not touching my brother, went up first, sharp and certain. Then Daniel's a little slower, a little shakier. One by one, the others followed. A forest of hands sprouting from expensive suits. A garden of betrayal. The motion carries Abernathy's side, and the sound was like stones grinding together, Lyra. I'm sorry. I offered him a single sharp nod. I pushed my chair back. The sound was obscenely loud in the silent room. Stood, my spine a rod of steel. I could feel their eyes on me. They expected tears, a scene, an outburst. They wanted to see the emotional, unstable woman Genevieve had painted me as. I would give them nothing. My gaze swept across their faces, lingering for a beat on Daniel, then finally settling on Genevieve. She met my stare, a tiny, triumphant smile playing at the corners of her lips. It was a minuscule thing, almost invisible. But I saw it. I cataloged it. I filed it away in the cold, quiet part of my mind where I was building my fortress. Without a word, I turned and walked out of the boardroom. My heels clicked with sharp, even reports on the marble floor. Click. My father's life's work. Click. My promise to him on his deathbed. Click. My entire future gone. I didn't stop at my office. It wasn't my office anymore. I walked past it, right to the elevator, and rode it down to the ground floor. The air outside was cold, a shock after the recycled atmosphere of the boardroom. I stood on the pavement, the city's noise roaring in my ears, and I did not cry. I simply began to calculate. They thought they had discarded me. They thought I was a broken part. They had forgotten that the most dangerous gear in any watch is the one that has been wound too tight. It doesn't just break, it snaps. It takes the entire mechanism down with it. 5 years, 60 months. 2,607 days, including the leap years. That is how long it takes for a ghost to be forgotten. And that is what I became. A ghost. My new life was built on silence and code. I didn't exist as Lyra Vance anymore. She was a casualty, a name in a press release about a corporate restructuring. In her place was no one. A series of shell corporations, encrypted servers, and a firewall so thick it was a digital fortress. I took the small inheritance my mother had left me, a portfolio of stocks she'd chosen with an almost prescient eye, and I learned a new trade. Not the delicate mechanics of time, but the brutal mechanics of money. I didn't trade in gold and gears anymore. I traded in volatility in futures, in the abstract rise and fall of empires far larger than the one my father had built. And I was very, very good at it. My mind, the one they had called sentimental, was built for patterns, for seeing the fine, intricate connections between seemingly unrelated events. It was the same skill that allowed me to spot a misaligned pallet fork in a new escapement design. I just applied it to the global market. My home was no longer a warm wood-paneled house filled with the scent of oil and polish. It was a penthouse apartment of glass and steel overlooking a city that never slept. It was sterile, clean, and empty. It's a perfect machine for living. The only person who had my real number was Bryn. Her voice on the phone was exactly as I remembered it from law school. Grounded. Practical. Unflappable. The final prospectus was released this morning, she said without preamble. No, how are you, Bryn? Didn't waste time on such things. It's as bad as we thought. Worse, even. I stared out my window at the river of headlights flowing through the city's arteries below. Define worse. They've leveraged the company assets against a series of high-risk expansion loans. 3 new product lines in as many years, all of them failures. They cheapened the materials, outsourced the labor to the lowest bidder, and tried to turn a luxury brand into a mass-market trinket. The brand identity is diluted, the debt-to-asset ratio is catastrophic, and the creditors are circling. Bryn paused. Daniel has run it straight into the ground. Or rather, Genevieve has. His name is on the paperwork, but her fingerprints are all over the strategy. A cold, quiet satisfaction settled in my chest. It wasn't joy. It was confirmation. The inevitable result of a flawed design And the sale? I asked. It's a fire sale, Bryn said. They're desperate. They're positioning it as a strategic acquisition. Opportunity for a visionary investor looking to revitalize a heritage brand. It's lipstick on a pig. Lyra, a very, very sick pig. What's the asking price? Bryn told me. It was an insult, a fraction of what it was worth the day they forced me out. A testament to their incompetence, to their greed. They've received 2 preliminary offers, Bryn continued. One from a Chinese conglomerate that will strip it for its patents, and another from a Swiss competitor who has wanted to absorb the Vance name for a generation. Both offers are lowball. They know Daniel is desperate. He won't sell to the Swiss, I said, my voice flat. Father's greatest rival. Daniel's pride, what little he has left, won't allow it. He'll take the Chinese offer and tell himself. He's expanding into a new market. There was a soft tapping sound on the other end of the line. Bryn, thinking? Which is where we come in, she said. Our offer will be submitted through the holding company in Zurich. It'll be completely anonymous. It'll be 5%. Higher than the Chinese offer. It's just enough to look like a godsend. Not enough to look suspicious. The paperwork is ready. All I need is your final authorization. This was it. The culmination of 5 years of relentless, silent work. Every stock I'd shorted, every algorithm I'd written. Every sleepless night spent watching the Tokyo Exchange open, it all led to this single moment. I thought of my father's hands. Large, surprisingly graceful, stained with oil at the cuticles, showing me how to set a balance spring. Patience, Lyra, he would say. Don't force it. Understand the mechanism. Feel how it wants to move. I understood the mechanism now. I knew exactly how it wanted to move. Bryn, I said, my voice a low whisper. Execute. Consider it done, she replied. There was a beat of silence, and for the first time a hint of something other than business entered her voice. Are you sure about this? Once you own it, you'll have to face them. Facing them is the entire point, I said. It's not enough to buy it back. They need to know who bought it. The next 48 hours were the longest of my life. I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. I watched the market tickers, my own portfolios rising and falling with the meaningless tide of global commerce, but my mind was elsewhere. It was in a boardroom in a city I hadn't set foot in for 5 years. I pictured the scene. Daniel, sweating in another overpriced suit. Genevieve, her face a perfect porcelain mask, a predator sensing the trap but not yet knowing its shape. I imagined them reading the offer. An anonymous Swiss buyer, a lifeline. An answer to their prayers delivered from the very direction Daniel's pride would allow him to accept. Bryn didn't call. She had her instructions. Radio silence until the ink was dry. The silence was its own form of torture, a vacuum in which my own thoughts echoed relentlessly. The analytical mind gave way to the flashes of raw emotion I had suppressed for so long. The sting of Abernathy's pity, the chilling triumph in Genevieve's eyes, the hollowed-out look of my own brother as he sold our birthright. Revenge, I had learned, was not a fiery passion. It was a cold dish, as the saying went. But the people who say that never mention how long you have to sit alone in the cold, waiting for it to be served. The call came at 4:17 a.m. on the 3rd day. My phone buzzed on the granite countertop, a harsh, violent sound in the stillness. I snatched it up. It's done, Bryn said. Her voice was laced with a fatigue that was mirrored by my own, but underneath it was a current of victory. The wire transfers are complete. The contracts are signed and digitally notarized. They held an emergency board meeting an hour ago. They accepted our offer without a single counter. Daniel was apparently relieved. I closed my eyes. The tension that had been a coiled spring in my spine for 5 years began to so slowly unwind. I leaned my forehead against the cool glass of the window. Outside, the first hints of dawn were breaking, painting the edges of the skyscrapers in pale gray. Vance, and Son, and all its subsidiary assets and intellectual properties. Bryn stated, a formal finality in her tone, now belong to the holding corporation. Which means, Lyra, they belong to you. I owned it. I owned the building. I owned the patents. Owned every last gear and spring. I owned the desk my father had used. I owned the chair Daniel was sitting in. I owned his title. I owned his salary. I owned him. When are they being notified of the change in ownership? I asked, my voice steady. The official transition documents will be delivered by courier at 9 a.m. their time, Bryn explained. The new owner is listed, of course, as the Zurich Holding Company. They won't know it's you. Not yet. No, I said softly. They won't. That's a message I need to deliver in person. I ended the call and stood there for a long time, watching the sun rise over my city. The fortress of my solitude. My hiding place. For 5 years, I had been a ghost, a whisper, an anonymous power moving through the digital ether. But the time for ghosts was over. It was time for the machine to see the face of its new master. The flight was a necessary purgatory. 7 hours sealed in a pressurized tube, suspended between the life I had built and the one I had come to dismantle. I didn't watch a film. I didn't read. I simply sat, a glass of water untouched on the tray table beside me, and let the plan spool out in my mind one final time. Every contingency, every possible reaction, every word I intended to say. I had rehearsed this moment for 5 years. It was less a conversation I was about to have and more a script I was about to perform. A script where I was the sole author and my brother and his wife were merely actors who didn't yet know their lines. For my return, I had chosen my armor with meticulous care. A bespoke suit of charcoal gray wool, so dark it was almost black. The jacket was cut with sharp, severe lines. The trousers were tailored to perfection. Beneath it, a silk blouse, the color of clotted cream. No jewelry, save for a watch. Not a Vance & Son. Never again. This was a Patek Philippe. A Nautilus. A watch famous for being born from a sketch on a napkin. A disruption to the industry. It was subtle, powerful, and ridiculously expensive. It was a message. I am not the woman you threw away. My hair was pulled back into the same severe chignon. My makeup was minimal, designed to accentuate the sharpness of my cheekbones. The coldness in my eyes. I was not coming home. I was invading. As the plane began its descent, the city spread out below us. Once, the sight of it would have filled me with a sense of belonging. Now it looked like a map. A grid of assets and objectives. My driver was waiting, as instructed. A black sedan, with tinted windows. He did not speak, for which I was grateful. Silence was a commodity I had come to value above all others. We swept through the familiar streets, and I allowed myself to observe the changes. New buildings piercing the skyline, old storefronts replaced by glittering chains. The city had moved on. It had forgotten Lyra Vance. Good. The surprise would be that much purer. The Vance & Son building came into view. It was smaller than I remembered. Less a monument to my father's genius, and more. It's just a building. A stone and glass box full of ghosts. Wait here, I told the driver. The command was crisp. Final, I stepped out of the car. The air was the same. A mix of traffic fumes and, if you were close enough to the river, a faint damp smell. I walked across the granite plaza, my heels making no sound. I had chosen my shoes for that purpose. Rubber soles. Silence was a weapon. The lobby was different. And yet agonizingly the same. They had replaced the warm Persian rugs with cold geometric patterns. They had swapped out the leather armchairs for sterile chrome benches, but the air still smelled of metal and cleaning fluid. And on the far wall behind the reception desk hung a massive backlit photograph of a watch. It's not one of Father's. Classic designs. was one of Daniel's, gaudy, over-designed. It had a dial cluttered with useless subdials, a bezel studded with small, cheap diamonds. It was a desperate plea for attention. It's a summary of everything he had done to our legacy. The receptionist was a young woman with bright pink hair and a bored expression. She didn't look up from her screen as I approached. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice monotone. "I'm here to see Daniel Vance," I said. "Do you have an appointment?" The question was automatic, her fingers still tapping away. "No," I said. "He's expecting me." This made her look up. Her eyes, ringed with thick black liner, scanned my face. There was no recognition. To her, I was just another woman in an expensive suit. An inconvenience. "He's in a meeting. Who shall I say is calling?" I allowed a small, cold smile to touch my lips. "Tell him an old business partner has come to discuss the terms of a recent acquisition." Her brow furrowed in confusion, but the word acquisition had the desired effect. It sounded important. It sounded like money. She picked up her handset. "Mr. Vance, I'm sorry to interrupt your meeting. There's a woman here to see you. She says it's about the acquisition." There was a pause. I could imagine the frantic whispered conversation on the other end. "The Swiss buyers had something gone wrong," he says. The receptionist started, but I was already walking toward the elevator bank. "I knew the way. They'll be waiting," I said over my shoulder, not breaking my stride. I pressed the call button. The doors slid open with a soft hiss, a sound as familiar to me as my own breathing. I stepped inside and pressed the button for the top floor, the executive floor. My floor, the ride-up, was silent. Just the low hum of the machinery. I watched the numbers climb, each one a step back in time. I felt a tremor in my hand and clenched it into a fist at my side. The analytical mind was still in control, but the raw emotion was a caged thing rattling. Its bars. Control. Inhale for 4, hold for 7. Exhale for 8. The doors opened onto a hushed, carpeted hallway. Nothing had changed here. The same muted gray walls. The same series of framed patents my father had been so proud of. I walked past them, my gaze fixed on the double doors at the end of the loo. Hall, the doors to the CEO's office. I could hear their voices from inside, muffled, anxious. Daniel's higher-pitched tones of panic and Genevieve's lower, sharper sounds of command. They were arguing about me, about the mysterious visitor. I reached the doors and stopped. I raised my hand, not to knock, but to feel the grain of the wood. My father had chosen this wood. He'd said it had character. I took one final, steadying breath. The rehearsal was over. The performance was about to begin. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The arguing stopped. The silence that fell was absolute, heavy, and immediate. It was the sound of the past, crashing into the present. The office was brighter than I remembered. Genevieve had replaced my father's heavy velvet curtains with thin white blinds. Flooding the room with stark afternoon light, she had redecorated. The comfortable, worn leather chairs were gone, replaced by a pair of angular, uncomfortable-looking monstrosities in white leather. A large abstract painting, a chaotic splash of angry reds and blacks, hung on the wall where a portrait of my grandfather used to be. She had tried to erase my father. She had tried to erase me. Daniel stood by the window, his back to me. He was holding a phone to his ear, but his arm went slack as he saw my reflection in the glass. He turned around slowly, his face a mask of disbelief. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. He looked older, weaker. The expensive suit hung on him now, not like armor, but like a costume that was too big. Genevieve was sitting behind the desk, my desk. She didn't look shocked or surprised. Her beautiful, elegant face went perfectly still. Her eyes, the color of a winter sky, narrowed on me. She wasn't seeing a ghost, she was seeing an enemy combatant. In that instant, she knew this was not a social call. She knew this was an attack. "Lyra, Daniel finally breathed, the name a puff of air. What? What are you doing here? I let the silence stretch, forcing him to endure his own discomfort. I walked further into the room, my gaze sweeping over the changes, my expression one of faint clinical distaste. I ran a single finger along the back of one of the white leather chairs. I was in the neighborhood, I said, my voice calm and even. I thought I'd stop by and see what you've done with the place. My eyes flicked to the garish painting. It's bold. Genevieve stood up, a slow, graceful movement. She was a queen rising from her throne to meet a challenger. She wore a dress the color of blood. It was a stunning choice. You should have called, she said. Her voice was like honey laced with shards of glass. And spoil the surprise, I asked, finally letting my eyes settle on her. Where's the fun in that? I turned my attention back to Daniel, who still looked like he'd been struck by lightning. You look flustered, brother. Bad news. We were just in a meeting, he stammered, gesturing vaguely at the phone still clutched in his hand. The buyers. Ah, yes, I said, nodding slowly. The anonymous holding company from Zurich. I heard you were having a fire sale. Things must be worse than I thought. Genevieve's eyes flashed. The company is in a period of strategic realignment. We received a very generous offer from a forward-thinking investment group. She was reciting from the press release, trying to maintain the fiction. It was almost pitiful. An offer you accepted, I trust. I asked, moving to stand on the other side of the desk, placing me on equal footing with her. We were two predators sizing each other up across a kill. Daniel was just a nervous herbivore watching from the sidelines. The deal was finalized this morning. Daniel said, a hint of pride creeping into his voice. The pride of a man who'd just been rescued from a burning building he'd set on fire himself. The company is secure. The Vance legacy is safe. The Vance legacy, I repeated, the words tasting like ash. I looked at him, truly looked at him, and the last vestiges of the boy I grew up with evaporated. You wouldn't know the first thing about the Vance legacy if it was screwed. To your wrist. My voice dropped, losing its light, conversational tone and taking on the hard edge of steel. You took our father's work, his name, and you ran it into a ditch because you were too weak to say no to her, and she was, too. Greedy to know when to stop. Now you listen to me, Genevieve hissed, her composure finally cracking. The porcelain mask was showing fine lines. You have no right to come in here. You abandoned this company. Abandoned. I let out a short, sharp laugh, devoid of all humor. I was excised like a tumor. You held the knife, Genevieve. Daniel just pushed it in. I took a step closer to the desk, but you're right. I shouldn't have come here unannounced. I should have let the new ownership do it for me. Daniel's face went white. What do you know about the new ownership? This was the moment. The crescendo. The final, satisfying click of the mechanism falling perfectly into place. I looked from his terrified face to Genevieve's furious one. I gave them my first genuine smile in 5 years. It was all teeth. I know everything about them, I said. The holding company in Zurich, the one that bought you out from under the Swiss and the Chinese. The one that now owns this building, this desk, your title, your car, and the very air you're breathing. I leaned forward, placing my hands flat on the polished surface of the desk. My desk. That's me. The 2 words hung in the air, heavy and solid, like stones dropped into a deep well. That's me. For a full 10 seconds, the only sound was the faint, almost imperceptible hum of the building's climate control system. Daniel's face, which had been pale with shock, seemed to collapse inward. The disbelief curdled into a kind of vacant horror. He stumbled back a step, his hand coming up to brace himself against the window frame, as if the view of the city itself had become nauseating. His mouth worked, but the sounds that emerged were little more than wet, useless clicks. No, it was Swiss. A holding company. A holding company I founded 3 years ago for this express purpose. I said, my voice cutting through his denial with surgical precision. A legal entity with a name and a letterhead, but whose every action was dictated by me. Every offer, every negotiation, every single cent transferred to your accounts came from me. Genevieve did not stumble. She did not pale. A dark, ugly flush crept up her neck, staining the flawless porcelain of her skin, her hands resting on the desk, curled into tight, white-knuckled fists. The mask of the elegant, powerful socialite didn't just crack. It was vaporized. What lay beneath was pure distilled rage. It was terrifying, and it was exactly what I had expected. "Bitch!" she snarled. The word was low and venomous. All the honey was gone, leaving only the poison. "You think you can just walk in here? After 5 years, you think we'll just let you?" I raised an eyebrow. "Let me." I gave a small, dry chuckle. "Genevieve, you seem to be confused about the nature of this transaction. This isn't a negotiation. It's a notification." I shifted my gaze to Daniel, who was now staring at me with the wide, uncomprehending eyes of a slaughtered animal. "I own the board because I am the board. I own the shares because I bought them. I own your employment contract. Or rather, I did." I reached into the inner pocket of my suit jacket and produced 2 envelopes. They were made of thick, expensive paper. I slid one across the polished desk toward him. His name was typed. On the front, Daniel Vance. "What is this?" he whispered, his eyes fixed on the envelope as if it were a snake. "That," I said calmly, "is your official notice of termination. Effective immediately. Your position as Chief Executive Officer of Vance & Son has been rendered redundant." The corporate jargon was intentional. It was the same cold, impersonal language they had used on me. He flinched, as if I'd slapped him. Genevieve moved then, a blur of motion, snatching the envelope before Daniel could. She tore it open, her movements jerky with fury. Her eyes scanned the page. "You can't do this. There are clauses. Severance packages." "Oh, I can," I assured her. "My lawyer, you'll find, is exceptionally thorough. There is a clause for termination in the event of gross negligence leading to significant financial instability and devaluation of company assets. I believe Daniel's tenure ticks all of those boxes. Wouldn't you agree?" I gestured around the office. "This entire fire sale is my evidence." I slid the second envelope across the desk, this one addressed to her. Genevieve Vance. She stared at it, her chest rising and falling rapidly. "And what's that?" she spat. "My walking papers?" "Don't be ridiculous," I said, my voice dripping with disdain. "You never worked here. You were never on the payroll. You held no official title. You were just a hobby my brother couldn't afford." I tapped the envelope. "That is a restraining order. It forbids you from setting foot on any property owned by Vance & Son or from contacting any of its employees, including me. If you violate it, I will have you arrested." This finally seemed to land a blow that even her rage couldn't deflect. She was, for the first time, speechless. The power she wielded was social, influential. It was wielded in whispers, at dinner parties over glasses of champagne. It was not a power that could stand up to the cold, hard force of the law. I had taken away her playground. I walked around the desk and stood before the large window. I looked down at the city below, my city, my new kingdom. "Security team is on its way up," I said, my back to them. "They will escort you both from the premises. You will be allowed to collect your personal effects from your office. Daniel, nothing else. You have 10 minutes. What you can't carry in one box will be disposed of." I heard a strangled sob. It was Daniel. "Lyra, please," he begged. The sound was pathetic. "She made me. I didn't. I never wanted." "Save it," I said, turning to face them one last time. My face was a mask of ice. "You had 5 years to pick up a phone. 5 years to remember. You had a sister, your choices were your own. I looked at Genevieve, whose face was a thunderous mask of hate. She knew she was beaten for today, but her eyes promised a war. I was counting on it. Your time is up. As if on cue, the office doors opened and two large men in crisp security uniforms stepped inside. They were professional, their faces impassive. They looked at me, and I gave them a subtle, decisive nod. The first guard approached my brother. "Sir, if you'll come with me." Daniel didn't resist, seemed to have shrunk, all the air gone out of him. He allowed himself to be led toward the door like a sleepwalker, his eyes still locked on my face, full of a terrible dawning understanding. The second guard stood by, waiting for Genevieve. She stood her ground for a moment longer, her glare of physical force. Then, with a final contemptuous toss of her head, she snatched her purse from the desk and strode toward the door, her shoulders ramrod straight. She did not look back. And then they were gone. The office was silent again. But this silence was different. It was clean. It was mine. I walked behind my desk, and ran my hand over its smooth, cool surface. I sank into the leather of the chair. It was a perfect fit. I had come home, but the feeling was not one of elation. It was not the hot flush of victory. It was a cold, quiet, and profoundly heavy sense of purpose. The demolition was complete. Now the reconstruction had to begin. By the next morning, the story had ripped through the company's upper echelons like a shockwave. Whispers followed me down the hallways. I could feel the eyes on my back. Fear, curiosity, awe. I ignored it all. At precisely 9 a.m., I walked into the main boardroom, the same room where I had been dismantled. They were all there, the entire senior management team. Mr. Abernathy sat at the far end of the table, looking 10 years older, his face ashen. The others, the ones who had raised their hands to cast me out, refused to meet my eye. They stared. At the table, at their notepads, at their hands. Good, let them sweat. I took my place at the head of the table. My rightful place. I didn't sit. I stood, my hands resting on the back of the chair. "Good morning," I said. The words were quiet, but they commanded the attention of the entire room. For those of you who do not remember me, my name is Lyra Vance, and as of yesterday afternoon, I am the sole owner and chief executive officer of this company. I let that hang in the air for a moment. I am aware, I continued, my voice even and dispassionate, of this company's performance over the past 5 years. I am aware of the crushing debt, the diluted brand identity, and the series of catastrophic product failures. I am aware that Vance & Son is no longer a hallmark of quality, but a cautionary tale. A few of them shifted uncomfortably. Abernathy looked like he might be physically ill. "That ends today," I stated. "My first order of business is to announce a full, comprehensive, and forensic audit of the last 60 months of this company's operations. Every contract, every invoice, every expense account will be scrutinized. Any irregularities will be dealt with, swiftly, and without sentiment." This was not a request. It was a threat, a promise. Their complicity, their silence, would have a price. My second point is one of vision. We are returning to the principles upon which my father built this company: quality, craftsmanship, and an unwavering commitment to perfection. We'll no longer produce disposable trinkets. We will create timepieces. We'll honor the Vance name, not exploit it. Any projects, product lines, or personnel that do not align with this vision will be eliminated. I scanned their faces. I saw fear, yes. But in the eyes of a few of the younger product designers, I saw a flicker of something else. Hope your divisional reports, detailing current projects, budgets, and personnel, are to be on my desk by end of day. That is all. I turned and walked out, leaving a stunned and terrified silence in my wake. I spent the rest of the day in my office, the door closed. fielding calls from Bryn and reviewing the preliminary financials she was sending through a secured server. The picture was grim. Fund Day debt was a monster, tangled and deeper than we had projected. Key suppliers had been alienated. The morale of the actual craftsmen, the ones who made the company what it was at an all-time low. Late in the afternoon, there was a soft knock on my door. "Come in," called out, not looking up from the spreadsheet on my monitor. The door opened and an old man stepped inside, holding a felt hat in his gnarled hands. He was stooped with age, his face a roadmap of wrinkles, his eyes a pale, watery blue. It was Alistair, my father's head watchmaker, the man who had first shown me how to hold a pair of tweezers. "Miss Lyra," he said, his voice raspy with age. I heard you were back." I stood up. A genuine, unbidden wave of emotion washed over me. Affection, respect. "Alistair, it's good to see you." "They moved me down to the archives 3 years ago," he said, a touch of shame in his voice. "Said my methods were archaic. My hand's not steady enough for the new lines." The new lines. The cheap, mass-produced garbage your hands built the finest tourbillon this company ever produced, I said softly. "I remember." He shuffled his feet. "We, the old guard. We were glad to hear it was you. We were afraid it was the Swiss." He looked up, his pale eyes finding mine. "What they did to this place, to your father's name. It was a crime, Miss Lyra. A crime." He reached into the pocket of his worn waistcoat and pulled out a small velvet pouch. He placed it carefully on my desk. I kept this. I was supposed to turn it in for scrap, but I couldn't. I opened the pouch and tipped its contents into my palm. 'Twas a balance wheel, a prototype. One of my father's last designs. An experimental alloy he believed would be immune to temperature fluctuations. A project they had abandoned the week after I was forced out. I looked from the delicate, intricate wheel in my hand to the old man's hopeful face. The mountain of debt, the hostile board, the ghost of Genevieve's hatred, it all seemed to fade for a moment. This was real. This was the soul of the company. 'Twas tarnished, hidden away, but it wasn't gone. It was waiting. "Alistair," I said, my voice gaining a strength that had nothing to do with revenge, "I want you to reopen the old R&D workshop. I'm putting you in charge of your first project." I held up the balance wheel. To finish this, a slow, wide smile spread across his face, crinkling the corners of his eyes. It was the first honest smile I'd seen since I'd returned. "Yes, Miss Lyra," he breathed. Right away. He backed out of the room, his shoulders a little straighter, his step a little lighter. I was left alone, the tiny, perfect wheel resting in my palm. It was a symbol, a beginning. My revenge was complete, but my father's legacy. I was just getting started on saving that. The weeks that followed were a brutal, grinding war fought not in a boardroom, but on spreadsheets and balance sheets. Victory was not a triumphant moment, but a single decimal point moved in the right direction. My days were a blur of caffeine and numbers. I lived in the office, fueled by a relentless cold fury that had long since burned away all emotion, leaving only purpose. I tore the company down to its foundations. I audited every department, every budget, every hire made in the last 5 years. The rot was deep. Cronies of Genevieve's were embedded in marketing. Daniel had signed disastrous long-term contracts with third-rate part suppliers to save a few dollars, compromising the very heart of our mechanisms. Firing people was the hardest part. Not the sycophants and the incompetent. That was easy. It's firing the people who were simply redundant. Casualties of Daniel's poor management. It's people with families who had given years to this company. Each termination was a precise surgical cut, necessary for the survival of the whole. But each one left a scar on what was left of my soul. This was the part of revenge they never showed in the stories. The lonely, ugly, necessary work of cleaning up the mess. And Genevieve made her move. It came in the form of an article, a 2-page spread in a major financial journal. The headline was Slick and Poisonous. Poison Pill or Phoenix? The vicious family feud behind the Vance and Son takeover. It was a masterpiece of character. Assassination, quoting anonymous former executives and concerned industry insiders. It painted me as a volatile, vindictive megalomaniac. It spoke of my forced exile and my obsessive 5-year plot to seize control. They called me unstable, erratic, a leader driven by emotion, not business sense. Every word was designed to spook investors, to poison our credit. Lines, to make suppliers question my leadership. Genevieve couldn't legally touch me or the company, so she had decided to burn down its reputation from the outside. I read the article once, my face impassive. Then I folded the journal neatly in half and placed it in the wastebasket. My hand hovered over the phone to call Bryn to start the libel suit. But I stopped. That was a defensive move. A reaction. That was playing her game. My father always taught me that the best defense was a perfect offense. Instead of calling my lawyer, I walked down to the R&D workshop. The air inside was blessedly clean, smelling of lubricating oil and hot metal. A stark contrast to the cloying perfume of Genevieve's lies. Alistair and his small team of master watchmakers men he'd personally brought back from early retirement or obscure departments where they'd been hidden away were huddled over a workbench. Their heads bowed in concentration under bright magnifying lamps. "How is it coming?" I asked, my voice softer here than anywhere else in the building. Alistair looked up, his eyes tired but bright with a familiar fire. "The alloy is a stubborn beast, Miss Lyra. Your father was trying to do something impossible," he gestured, to a series of complex equations chalked on a blackboard. "But we think we found the final variable. A 3-stage cooling process. It stabilizes the crystalline structure." "Show me," I said. He led me to a high-frequency chronometer. Inside a glass case, a tiny, gleaming balance wheel, no bigger than my pinky nail, was spinning at an almost invisible speed. It was the color of pale champagne. It was the prototype. "It's been running for 300 hours, Alistair said, his voice thick with pride. "Through temperature shifts from negative 10 degrees Celsius to 40 degrees. The deviation, Miss Lyra, is 0. Not a single second gained or lost. It's perfect." I stared at the tiny spinning wheel. Genevieve's article. The skeptical banks, the frightened board members, all of it faded away. They were noise. This was real. This was the soul of the machine. This was my father's genius and Alistair's dedication, fused into a single, perfect component. This would be my answer to her. Not a lawsuit. Not a press conference. A masterpiece. "Shut down all other projects," I said, my voice resonating with a newfound certainty. "Every resource, every watchmaker, every single dollar we have is going into building the watch that will house this. We're going to show them what a Vance and Son timepiece truly is." 6 months later, we stood on the precipice. The event was held in a minimalist art gallery, all white. Walls and polished concrete floors. The guest list was a curated collection of the world's most influential horological journalists, retailers, and collectors. The air was thick with tension and quiet critical whispers. Genevieve's smear campaign had been effective. We were not the triumphant return of a legacy brand. We were a curiosity, a potential train wreck everyone had turned out to watch. I stood backstage, my heart a trip hammer against my ribs. I wore a simple black dress. My only jewelry was the watch on my wrist. The first one. The prototype housed in a simple steel case Alistair had made for me. It was time. I walked onto the stage to a polite, but tepid, round of applause. The lights were blinding. I gripped the sides of the lectern. "Good evening," I began, my voice steady. "For the last 5 years, this company has sold you a story of mass-market luxury, of accessible prestige. It was a hollow story, and it almost cost us everything. A murmur went through the crowd. This was not the usual corporate PR speech. Legacy is not about a name stamped on a dial. I continued, my eyes scanning the room, meeting the skeptical gazes. It's about knowledge passed from one generation to the next. It's about a relentless pursuit of perfection. My father believed that a watch was not a machine for telling time. He believed it was a machine for defying it. I told him the story. It's the story of his final unfinished project, of the experimental alloy, of the master watchmaker who kept it safe for 5 years, refusing to let it be melted down for scrap. I told them of a small team of old men working in a forgotten workshop, who had succeeded where an entire corporation had failed. Tonight, we are not launching a new product line. We're launching a single timepiece, statement of purpose. We are returning to who we are. On the large screen behind me, an image appeared. A watch of breathtaking simplicity and elegance. A clean obsidian dial. A slender, polished case. No diamonds, no useless clutter. Just 3 hands and a small, discreet inscription at the bottom. It is powered by my father's final innovation, the Eterna Balance, I announced. And we have named it the Phoenix. I held up my wrist. It is the most accurate, most stable mechanical timepiece this company has ever produced. It is our past and it is our future. It is the promise that the soul of Vanson's son has, indeed, risen from the ashes. I finished, and a profound silence held the room. For a terrifying second, I thought I had failed. Then one person began to clap, a respected, notoriously harsh critic from Geneva. Then another, and another. Within seconds, the entire gallery was filled with a thunderous, genuine wave of applause. It washed over me, and for the first time, the cold, hard fortress around my heart began to thaw. Later, as the event was winding down and the press was clamoring to see the watch up close, I saw him, Daniel. He was standing near the back of the gallery, alone. He looked diminished. He wore a simple, off-the-rack suit. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a deep, weary sadness. He saw me looking and took a hesitant step forward. My security detail moved, but I gave them a slight shake of my head. He stopped a respectful distance away. "Lyra," he said, his voice quiet. It's beautiful." Dad would have been proud. "Yes," I said, was all that was needed. I didn't come here to ask for anything," he said, fumbling with his words. I wanted to say, you were right about everything. I was weak. And I was a coward. And I am sorry for what I did to you. And for what I let happen to his company. The apology was 5 years too late. But it was real. Could see that. I looked at my brother, this man who had been my closest childhood friend and my greatest betrayer. The rage I had held for him was gone. I wasn't even sure when it had left. It had been replaced by the weight of the work, by the purpose of the goal. All that was left was a hollow sort of pity. "Go home, Daniel," I said, not unkindly. It was a dismissal, but it was also a release. I was letting him go. He was no longer a part of my story. He gave me a sad, grateful nod and disappeared into the crowd. I was alone for a moment. The buzz of the party a distant hum. My revenge was complete. The scales were balanced. But standing there, I realized the victory I felt had nothing to do with vengeance. It had to do with creation, with taking something broken and making it whole again. My phone buzzed. It was Bryn. "You can turn on the financial news tomorrow morning," she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "Retail orders are flooding in, and the journal's parent company, called MTA, issuing a full retraction and a public apology. Genevieve has been neutralized." "Thank you, Bryn," I said, "for everything." "You did this, Lyra," she said. "Go enjoy it." I ended the call and walked to the gallery's large window, looking out at the glittering lights of the city. I looked down at the Phoenix on my wrist. Its movement was silent. Perfect. It wasn't a trophy of a war won. It was a promise of a future to be built. The weight on my shoulders was still there, but it was no longer the cold, heavy burden of revenge. It was the warm, solid weight of a legacy, reclaimed and reborn. 5 years later, the workshop was quiet. It was the clean, sacred quiet that Lyra had almost forgotten, the kind that was filled not with absence, but with potential. It smelled of cedar wood, linseed oil, and the faint metallic temps of brass. This was her father's private workshop, a small outbuilding behind the main family house, a house she now called home. She had spent the first year after her return purging it of Genevieve's cold, minimalist aesthetic, and the last 4 years slowly, carefully filling it with life again. On the workbench before her, beneath the bright, clear light of a watchmaker's lamp, lay the disassembled components of a new movement. A perpetual calendar with a unique retrograde date function she had designed herself. Her hands, steady and sure, moved with a familiar grace, sorting tiny, iridescent screws into a grooved tray. She was no longer just a CEO. She was a watchmaker again. Vance & Son was thriving. After the runaway success of the Phoenix, they had followed with the Alistair, a tourbillon of breathtaking complexity that had won the Grand Prix de l'Agérie de Genève, the highest honor in the industry. The company was smaller, now more focused. It was profitable, respected, and utterly independent. It was, once again, a benchmark for quality, a true legacy. Alistair had retired 2 years ago, his hands finally succumbing to a gentle tremor. He lived comfortably in a small cottage on the coast, and every few months a package would arrive for Lyra containing a new book on horological history or a rare tool he'd found at an estate sale. He was happy. Her phone buzzed softly on the workbench. A message from Bryn. Just closed the deal for the new boutique in Tokyo. They're ecstatic. You owe me dinner. Lyra smiled, a genuine, easy smile that came to her more often. These days she typed back a quick reply. Of course, my place. I'll open the good wine. Their friendship, forged in the crucible of revenge, had settled into a warm, comfortable alliance. Bryn was still her lawyer, but more than that, she was the one person who knew the entire story, who had seen the ghost Lyra had become, and helped her find her way back. She set the phone aside, and her gaze drifted to a society magazine lying on a nearby table left there by her housekeeper. On the cover, under a headline about a charity gala in Monaco, was a small photograph. It was Genevieve. She looked brittle, thinner. Her famous beauty was sharpened into something hard and severe. The caption mentioned her by her new name, the Baroness von Kessler. After the public humiliation of the lawsuit's retraction, her social standing in their old world had evaporated. She had done what she always did. She had found a man. This one was an aging, scandal-plagued German baron with a crumbling castle, and a title that was all he had left. Lyra felt nothing looking at the picture. No anger, no satisfaction, just a faint, distant pity. Genevieve had not been defeated. She had simply been rendered irrelevant, a ghost in her own gilded cage. As for Daniel, the final loose thread had been tied a year ago. A letter had arrived, postmarked from a small town in Oregon. It was not an apology. It was not a plea. It was just a short, simple note written in a steady hand. He had a new wife, a quiet woman who taught pottery. They had a daughter who was teaching high school woodworking. He included a small, awkwardly framed photo of the three of them, smiling in front of a small, rustic house. He looked calm. The weakness that had defined him was gone, replaced by a simple, hard-won peace. He had never asked for forgiveness. But in that letter, Lyra had finally given it without needing to say a word. She had put the letter and the photo in a box and had not looked at it since. She picked up a tiny palette fork with her tweezers, its ruby tips catching the light, like drops of blood. She thought back to the woman she had been 5 years ago, the one who had walked into that boardroom with a heart full of ice and a mind bent on a single, destructive purpose. Revenge had been a necessary fire, a cauterizing flame that burned. away the poison, but it could not build anything. That, she had learned, was the harder part. The patient work of rebuilding, the quiet satisfaction of creating, the slow, steady process of healing. She leaned into the eyepiece, her world shrinking to the microscopic landscape of gears and springs. The universe in miniature. She made a tiny, fractional adjustment to the escapement. The balance wheel began to spin, steady and true. A quiet, rhythmic beat in the silent workshop, like a heart, strong and finally at peace. Another year had passed, a year of quiet, relentless growth, a year where the name Vance & Son had been cleansed of its tarnish, polished by success until it shone brighter than ever before. The ghosts of the past had been laid to rest, and Lyra had finally, truly found a rhythm that was not driven by the frantic tempo of revenge, but by the steady, satisfying pulse of creation. The company was launching a new timepiece, the Meridian, a world timer of extraordinary complexity and grace. The launch event was not in a stark defensive gallery, but in the grand hall of the city's oldest observatory. The theme was not resurrection, it was exploration. Lyra stood on the observation deck, a glass of champagne in her hand. Looking out at the city lights that spread below like a fallen constellation, she felt a profound sense of peace. The war was over. She had won. The story, she believed, was finished. It is a dangerous thing to believe a story is over, especially when you have an enemy who has nothing left to do but read the previous chapters and search for a single, overlooked word that can be used to unravel the entire tale. The first sign of trouble arrived a week later, was not a thunderclap, but a quiet, formal letter delivered by a courier. The letterhead was ornate, embossed with a coat of arms she didn't recognize, and came from a law firm in Zurich she had never heard of. It was addressed to her, personally. Bryn was on a video call with her as she opened it. Lyra slit the thick, creamy envelope with a letter opener, her movements unconcerned. Another crank claiming to have invented the rotor. Bryn asked, a wry smile on her face. We seem to get one of those every month. Something a bit more aristocratic, it seems, Lyra murmured, scanning the preamble. It's from the attorneys representing a Baron Klaus von Kessler. Bryn's smile vanished. Genevieve's husband. The very same, Lyra said, her voice remaining neutral, though a cold stillness was gathering in her gut. Achoo. Read on. The language was dense, formal legalese. But the core of it was an accusation of such absurdity that she almost laughed. It was a cease and desist. Not for the Meridian, not for the Phoenix, for the Vance original. Actual model 1948. The watch that had launched the company. Her grandfather's first masterpiece. They're claiming patent infringement, Lyra said, her disbelief clear. On a 75-year-old design. They allege the escapement mechanism was not my grandfather's original work, but was based on a pre-existing design by a German watchmaker named Stefan Heimer. That's insane, Bryn said immediately. A shakedown. Genevieve is putting him up to it to try and squeeze money out of you. We'll bury them in procedural motions. Don't give it a second thought. Lyra wanted to agree. It was the logical conclusion. A desperate, pathetic cash grab. And yet, the name Stefan Heimer. It felt like a splinter of ice under her skin, ominous in its specificity. Why not just claim it was the Baron's family design? Why invent a specific, unknown watchmaker? Look into it, Bryn, Lyra said, her voice a little tighter than before. Be thorough. I want to know who Stefan Heimer was. Want to know everything. 2 weeks later, the file Bryn sent over was thin. Stefan Heimer had existed. He was a master craftsman from the Black Forest region of Germany, an area famous for its clockmakers. He had owned a small, respected workshop that went out of business in the turmoil following the Second World War. He died in 1962, penniless and obscure. There was no record of any patents filed under his name. No connection to the Vance family. Nothing. It's a ghost story, Lyra, Bryn said over the phone. A fabrication. Genevieve likely had a private investigator dig up the name of some poor dead craftsman to give her ridiculous claim a veneer of legitimacy. It's a bluff, designed to harass you. We should file for dismissal. Lyra stood in her father's workshop, the phone pressed to her ear. The scent of wood and oil was usually a comfort. Today, it was not. A bluff implies they want something, Lyra reasoned. They haven't asked for money, not yet. They will, Bryn insisted. This is just the opening shot. Perhaps Bryn was right. Lyra tried to force the cold knot in her stomach to unclench. It was a ghost story. She did not believe in ghosts. The package arrived the next day. There was no return address. It was a simple brown paper-wrapped box sent by international post. Her security team scanned it and found nothing dangerous inside. They brought it to her office alone. She sliced it open. The contents were nestled in aged, yellowed tissue paper. The first thing she pulled out was a photograph. Black and white, its edges scalloped in the style of the late 1940s. 3 men stood in front of a brick workshop. 2 of them she recognized instantly. Her grandfather, looking young and fiercely ambitious. Her father, just a boy at his side. The third man was gaunt, with tired eyes and the large, capable hands of a craftsman. He wore a worn leather apron. Lyra felt a jolt, a sickening lurch of recognition. It had to be him, Stefan Heimer. Beneath the photograph was a sheaf of papers. Brittle with age, there were technical drawings, schematics, rendered with the beautiful precision of a master draftsman. They were the designs for the 1948 Vance original escapement. Every line, every gear, every angle was exactly as she knew it from the company archives. Except for this small, neat signature in the bottom right-hand corner of every page. It did not say Vance. It said S. Heimer.